Welcome to my channel. Here, we share inspiring stories of brave and strong people. Maybe you'll see yourself or someone you know in these stories. Thank you for watching. The quiet streets of Thunder Ridge betrayed. No sign of the storm brewing beneath. For 6 long months, the Crimson Talons' reign had left over 200 residents living in fear. Their businesses extorted, and their spirits scarred, with no end in sight. But when the gang vandalized Frank Jacobs' hardware store and desecrated the flag he had raised every day for 20 years, they crossed an invisible line. Frank, a decorated veteran who had once led 15 rescue missions behind enemy lines, made a single call that would awaken a sleeping giant. Within 48 hours, hundreds of veterans from across the country would converge on the town. Not for revenge, but to protect what mattered most. Within 48 hours, hundreds of veterans from across the country would converge on the town. Not for revenge, but to protect what mattered most. Leave a comment and let us know where you're tuning in from. If you enjoy stories like this, hit subscribe so you don't miss our next inspiring journey tomorrow. The small town of Thunder Ridge, Montana, nestled in a valley surrounded by towering pines and rugged hills, had always been a quiet place. The locals knew each other by name, and the diner on Main Street, owned by Lila Harper, was the heart of the community. Yet, in recent months, the tranquility of the town had been shattered. A motorcycle gang called the Crimson Talons, led by the ruthless Victor Kane, had descended upon Thunder Ridge like a storm. Victor Kane and his Crimson Talons were a fearsome presence. With their roaring engines, leather vests adorned with a menacing Crimson Hawk emblem, and intimidating glares, they spread fear wherever they went. They demanded protection money from businesses, vandalized those who resisted, and left the residents living in constant dread. Chief Ben Carter, the head of Thunder Ridge's small police force, found himself overwhelmed. "We've got laws," he would say, "but they don't mean much when people are too scared to testify." One chilly morning, Lila stood behind the counter of her diner, wiping it clean while listening to the worried murmurs of her regulars. Among them were Martha Green, a retired schoolteacher, and Harold Young, a lifelong resident and local handyman. They'd gathered for coffee and shared their frustrations about the Crimson Talons. "They were at the gas station again last night," Martha said, shaking her head. "Poor Joe. They kicked over his pumps and spray-painted his walls. He's thinking about selling the place and leaving town." Harold sighed deeply. "What can he do? What can any of us do? They've got us cornered, and we all know it." Chief Carter, seated at the end of the counter, rubbed his temples. "It's not that simple. Without evidence, without witnesses willing to speak up, my hands are tied. And believe me, these guys know how to keep people scared." The bell above the diner's door jingled, drawing everyone's attention. In walked Henry Jacobs, a tall man with silver hair and a steady gaze. At 72 years old, Henry owned Jacobs Hardware, a shop that had served the town for decades. He was a Vietnam War veteran, though he rarely spoke of his time in the service. His presence commanded respect, and his reputation for integrity made him a cornerstone of the community. "Morning, everyone," Henry said as he stepped inside. Nodding to Lila, he took his usual seat by the window and ordered black coffee. The group's conversation quickly shifted to the Crimson Talons. "They haven't come by your store yet, have they?" Martha asked, concern evident in her voice. Henry took a sip of his coffee before answering. "They came yesterday. A couple of them strutted in, knocked over a display rack, and told me I'd be better off paying their fee. Lila gasped. Henry, what did you do? I told them no. Henry replied simply. His tone was calm, but his words carried weight. Told them I've seen scarier things than leather jackets and loud bikes. Harold chuckled nervously. Henry, you're either the bravest or craziest man in town. Maybe both. Sometimes, standing up isn't about bravery or craziness. Henry said. It's about knowing the difference between right and wrong. They might intimidate some people, but they're not taking my flag. The group fell silent, knowing exactly what he meant. Every morning, Henry raised an American flag outside his store, a symbol of his service and his unwavering pride in the values he'd fought to protect. To him, the flag wasn't just cloth on a pole, it was a reminder of sacrifices made and principles worth defending. The conversation turned somber as the group discussed the town's struggles. Martha mentioned other businesses closing their doors, while Harold lamented the growing number of for sale signs popping up on lawns. Lila, glancing out the window, sighed. It's like they're choking the life out of this place. Henry, his gaze steady, finally spoke. This town's got more life in it than they think. Bullies always do the same thing, they push too far. When that happens, they find out who they're really dealing with. His words hung in the air, filling the room with a glimmer of hope. For a moment, the fear that had gripped Thunder Ridge seemed to loosen its hold. But as they finished their coffee and went about their day, the shadow of the Crimson Talons lingered, a reminder that the fight was far from over. The morning sun cast its golden rays over Thunder Ridge, lighting the streets with an uneasy stillness. Henry Jacobs unlocked the door to Jacobs Hardware, taking his time as he straightened the American flag mounted beside the entrance. He adjusted its position until it caught the morning breeze, letting the stars and stripes ripple in defiance against the shadow that had fallen over the town. To Henry, this flag wasn't just a decoration, it was a declaration of resilience, a message to the Crimson Talons that Thunder Ridge would not bow so easily. The bell above the hardware store door jingled as Henry stepped inside. The familiar scent of sawdust and metal greeted him. Though the shelves were stocked and the counters spotless, there was an unshakable tension in the air. Henry's mind lingered on yesterday's encounter with Victor Kane's gang. Their threats, delivered with cocky grins and deliberate malice, hadn't fazed him outwardly. But deep down, he knew their actions were escalating. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. Henry looked up to see a customer entering, Rachel Harper, Lila's niece, who had recently returned to town to help at the diner. The young woman's eyes darted around nervously, a reflection of the fear gripping the community. Morning, Rachel. Henry greeted her with his usual calm tone. What can I do for you today? Rachel hesitated, then approached the counter. Uncle Henry, I need some screws for a loose table leg at the diner. Aunt Lila's been worried it might give out during the morning rush. Henry nodded, selecting a small box of screws and placing them on the counter. Tell Lila to stop by if she needs anything else, he said. Then, noticing Rachel's troubled expression, he added, Everything all right? She glanced at the window, as if expecting one of the gang's motorcycles to appear. I just hate how things have gotten around here. It's like they're everywhere. The way they act. Like they own this town, she trailed off, shaking her head. Henry leaned forward slightly, his voice steady. Rachel, this town's been through hard times before. People like Victor Kane count on fear to keep folks quiet. But fear only works if you let it. Rachel's gaze softened, a flicker of hope breaking through her anxiety. She nodded, thanked him, and left the store with her screws in hand. Henry watched her go, the weight of responsibility settling on him. He'd always been a quiet man, content to live his life without stirring trouble. But now, trouble had found him, and he couldn't ignore it. The day passed slowly, punctuated by the occasional customer and the hum of Henry's thoughts. By the time the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across Main Street, he decided it was time to close up. As he locked the front door, a low rumble reached his ears. He turned to see a line of motorcycles approaching, their headlights cutting through the dusk. Victor Kane and his gang rolled to a stop in front of the hardware store. Kane dismounted first, his swagger exuding arrogance. He was flanked by two of his lieutenants, Nick Scorpion Ramirez and Caleb Lightning Ward, both known for their ruthless loyalty. Kane's gaze fixed on Henry as he approached, his grin as sharp as the blade tattooed on his arm. "Evening, old man," Kane drawled, his voice oozing mockery. "Still flying that flag of yours? I see. Real bold of you. Considering." Henry met his eyes without flinching. "That flag stays up. Doesn't matter what you or anyone else thinks." Kane's grin faltered, but he quickly recovered, stepping closer. "You think you're some kind of hero?" he sneered. "Maybe you were once. But this isn't some war zone. You're just an old man in a dying town. And I'm the one calling the shots now. You don't scare me." Henry replied evenly. "I've seen men like you before. Bullies who think they're invincible until someone stands up to them." The tension in the air was palpable. Kane's expression hardened as he signaled to Scorpion and Lightning. The two men stepped forward, their presence intimidating. But Henry remained unfazed. He knew better than to show weakness. "Here's the deal, Jacobs," Kane said, his tone cold. "You pay the fee, or you'll find out just how bad things can get around here. And that flag?" He pointed at it, a sneer curling his lips. "Next time, it won't just be your property getting trashed." Henry's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked back toward the door, leaving Kane and his men standing on the sidewalk. Before stepping inside, he paused and looked back at them. "This town doesn't belong to you," Henry said firmly. "And as long as I'm here, it never will." With that, he closed the door, locking it behind him. Kane stood motionless for a moment, his fists clenched. Then, with a sharp gesture, he ordered his gang to mount their bikes. The roar of their engines echoed down the street as they sped away. But their threat lingered in the air like a storm cloud. Inside the store, Henry leaned against the counter, his heart pounding. He'd faced danger before, but this felt different. He wasn't a soldier anymore. And the stakes weren't just his life, but the soul of the town he loved. He stared at the flag through the window, its colors dim in the fading light, and resolved to do whatever it took to protect what it represented. That night, Henry sat in his living room with the phone in his hand. He stared at the number he hadn't dialed in years, his thumb hovering over the buttons. Memories of Vietnam flooded his mind, the camaraderie, the missions, and the promises made in the heat of battle. One promise, in particular, echoed in his thoughts: "If you ever need me, no matter when or where, I'll come." Finally, he pressed the buttons, each beep sending a shiver down his spine. The line rang twice before a gruff voice answered on the other end. "Murphy," the voice said. Henry took a deep breath. "It's Jacobs. I need your help." There was a pause, and then Murphy's voice softened. "Henry? After all these years? What's going on?" Henry explained the situation, detailing the Crimson Talons' reign of terror and the danger they posed to Thunder Ridge. Murphy listened intently, his silence a sign of the gravity of the request. When Henry finished, Murphy's response was immediate. "I'll rally the boys. You're not alone in this." Relief washed over Henry. But he knew this was just the beginning. The battle for Thunder Ridge was about to take a decisive turn. And Henry was ready to stand at the forefront, just as he had all those years ago. The next morning, Henry Jacobs arrived at Jacobs Hardware just as the sun crept over the hills, its golden rays barely illuminating the town. He unlocked the door, just as he had every day for decades, and prepared to raise the American flag outside his shop. This daily ritual was more than a habit, it was a testament to his principles. A quiet defiance against the Crimson Talons. But as he stepped outside, something stopped him cold. The flagpole stood bare. The flag, which had flown proudly since the store's opening, was gone. His eyes darted to the sidewalk, where a charred piece of fabric lay in a small pile of ash. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Victor Kane and his gang had gone too far. Henry bent down to collect the ashes, his hands trembling. He didn't say a word, but his jaw tightened, and his chest burned with anger. His mind raced with memories of comrades who had sacrificed their lives for the very flag now reduced to ashes. The disrespect was an attack not just on him but on everything he stood for. The sound of an approaching engine broke the silence. Lila Harper's pickup truck slowed to a stop in front of the store. She jumped out, her face pale with concern. "Henry, I heard what happened," she said, rushing toward him. Her eyes widened as she saw the ashes in his hand. Henry stood, brushing off his hands. "They think they can scare me, but they've only made this fight personal." Lila's voice wavered. "This is more than just intimidation, Henry. They're escalating. The whole town's afraid. And I don't want to lose anyone else." Henry nodded solemnly, understanding her fear. Fear's what they're counting on. But giving in only feeds it. "They've burned my flag, but they haven't burned my resolve." A few minutes later, Harold Young and Martha Green joined them. Word of the flag burning had spread quickly, and the small group gathered outside Jacobs Hardware, each person wearing a mixture of outrage and worry. "This town used to be peaceful," Martha said, shaking her head. "Now we're all walking on eggshells, wondering what they'll destroy next." Harold added, "They've broken windows, trashed businesses, and now this? What more do they have to do before we all stand up?" Henry turned to face them, his eyes resolute. "We can't keep waiting for someone else to fix this. Appeasing them won't work. It only shows them they can take more." Lila looked down, her voice trembling. "But Henry, what can we do? They're armed, and there's so many of them. The police can't, or won't, stop them." Henry straightened his shoulders. "I've fought men who thought they were invincible. They weren't. This gang, they're just bullies with no respect for anything. And I know how to handle bullies." The group exchanged uncertain glances. Henry knew their fear was real, but he also knew it couldn't define their actions. After a moment of silence, he looked directly at Lila. "Lila, I'm going to call someone who can help." Her brow furrowed. "Who? The state police?" Henry shook his head. "No. Someone better." Later that evening, Henry sat in his small office at the back of the hardware store. The dim light of a desk lamp illuminated a stack of yellowed papers and a rotary phone that had seen better days. He ran a hand through his silver hair as he stared at a dog-eared address book, its cover worn from years of use. His finger traced down the list of names until it stopped at one, Colonel Jack Murphy. Henry let out a slow breath. It had been decades since he'd last spoken to Murphy. But he knew his old friend would answer the call. They'd made a promise to each other in Vietnam. One forged in blood and fire, we don't leave our own behind. He dialed the number. Each turn of the rotary dial filling the room with a mechanical hum. The phone rang twice before a deep, familiar voice answered. "This is Murphy." Henry's heart steadied. "Jack." "It's Henry Jacobs." There was a pause on the line, followed by a warm chuckle. "Henry. Been a long time. Old friend. How are you?" "Could be better," Henry replied, his voice calm but firm. "I've got a situation here in Thunder Ridge. I need your help." Murphy's tone grew serious. "Tell me what's going on." Henry recounted the events of the past few months, the arrival of the Crimson Talons, their escalating intimidation, and the flag burning that morning. He described the fear gripping the town and the helplessness of the local police. By the time he finished, Murphy was silent for a moment, the weight of Henry's words sinking in. "Sounds like you've got a real mess on your hands," Murphy finally said. "But you called the right man. I've got people who can be there within days. Veterans who know how to handle situations like this." Henry's grip on the phone tightened. "Jack, I don't want a war zone. I just want these people to see there's a line they can't cross." "Understood," Murphy replied. "We're not coming in to stir trouble. We're coming to stand with you. When they see we're not afraid, they'll think twice." Henry nodded, though Murphy couldn't see it. "Thank you, Jack. This town needs hope right now." "Hope's what we're bringing," Murphy said with conviction. "Sit tight, Henry. Help is on the way." As Henry hung up the phone, he felt a spark of resolve reignite within him. For the first time in months, he didn't feel alone in the fight. He stood, walked to the front of the store, and looked out at Main Street, where the remnants of the flag had been swept away. In their place, a new flag hung proudly under the soft glow of the streetlights. The battle for Thunder Ridge was far from over. But Henry knew one thing for certain: the Crimson Talons had underestimated him. And soon, they would learn that this town's spirit was far stronger than their fear tactics. Colonel Jack Murphy was a man of swift action. As soon as he hung up the phone with Henry Jacobs, he wasted no time in setting his plan into motion. Murphy's network of veterans spanned across multiple states. A brotherhood forged not only in battle but in the shared commitment to stand against injustice. He began dialing numbers, each call reconnecting him with a soldier, a friend, or a comrade who owed their lives to the bonds they'd formed in the field. "Murphy here," he'd begin, his voice commanding respect and urgency. "We've got a situation in Montana. Small town. Big trouble. Need you on this." The responses were immediate and unwavering. Men and women who had once answered the call to serve their country were now answering the call to serve their fellow citizens. Within hours, the network was alive with activity. From Colorado to Idaho, Texas to Washington, word spread like wildfire. Veterans loaded their trucks and motorcycles with gear, maps, and flags, ready to converge on Thunder Ridge. Murphy sent out detailed instructions, meet-up points, strategies for entering the town quietly, and a list of protocols to ensure their presence wouldn't escalate the tension unnecessarily. This wasn't about waging war, it was about showing strength and solidarity. Back in Thunder Ridge, Henry Jacobs stepped out of Jacobs Hardware and onto Main Street. It was another crisp, clear morning, but the tension in the air remained thick. The news of the flag burning had spread, and many of the townspeople were losing hope. Henry could see it in their faces, a mix of fear and resignation that threatened to break the community's spirit. Determined to change that, Henry walked down the street, stopping at Lila Harper's diner. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside. A handful of regulars, including Harold Young and Martha Green, looked up from their coffee and conversations, their expressions lighting with curiosity. "Morning, Henry," Lila greeted, though her voice carried a hint of worry. "Everything all right?" Henry nodded. "Better than all right. Got some good news to share." He gestured for everyone to gather around, his presence commanding attention. "I know things have been hard," he began, his deep voice steady and reassuring. "The Crimson Talons want us to believe we're alone, that we have no choice but to give in. But I'm here to tell you, they're wrong. Help is on the way." The group exchanged uncertain glances. Martha spoke first. "Help? From who?" "The police haven't been able to do anything. And we all know the Talons won't just back down." Henry's lips curled into a faint smile. "Not the police. Something better. My old friend, Colonel Jack Murphy, is bringing people who know how to deal with situations like this. Veterans. Men and women who understand what it means to stand up to bullies." Lila's eyes widened. "Veterans? You mean soldiers?" "Not just soldiers," Henry clarified. "Brothers and sisters who've faced tougher enemies than the Talons could ever dream of being. They're coming here because they believe in what's right. And because they believe in us." The room fell silent for a moment as the weight of Henry's words sank in. Then Harold let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned. You really think this will work, Henry?" Henry's gaze was firm. "I don't think. I know. We're not alone in this. And when the Talons see that, they'll know they've made the wrong kind of enemies." The group's initial hesitation began to give way to cautious optimism. Lila poured fresh coffee for everyone, her hands steadier than they'd been in weeks. "Henry, if you say we've got help, then I believe you. This town has always been about sticking together. And we're not about to stop now." Martha added, "I'll admit, I was losing hope. But hearing this, it's like I can finally breathe again." Henry gave them a nod of gratitude. "Just hold on a little longer. Murphy's people will be here soon. And when they arrive, this town will have the strength it needs to fight back." Across the region, the mobilization of veterans continued. At a truck stop in Boise, Idaho, a group of bikers gathered under a large awning, their motorcycles gleaming in the afternoon sun. Each bike bore a small flag, a symbol of their shared purpose. One of the bikers, a man with a weathered face and a leather jacket that bore the name Griffin, addressed the group. "Murphy called," Griffin said, his voice carrying over the hum of engines. "There's a town in Montana that needs us. A brother of ours is standing up to a gang. And we're not letting him do it alone." The bikers cheered in agreement, their camaraderie evident in every gesture and word. They mounted their bikes, engines roaring to life as they prepared to hit the road. In Colorado, a retired Army medic named Clara Doc Hayes packed her truck with supplies, first aid kits, radios, and food. She had served alongside Murphy in Iraq and knew he wouldn't call unless the need was dire. As she drove toward Montana, she thought of the people in Thunder Ridge and the hope they must be clinging to. By the time night fell, Thunder Ridge was no longer alone. The veterans were coming. And with them, the promise of solidarity and strength. As Henry stood on his porch, watching the stars blink into existence, he allowed himself a rare moment of hope. He had made the call, and his brothers and sisters had answered. Now, it was only a matter of time before Thunder Ridge would rise again. The sound of engines echoed through the hills surrounding Thunder Ridge as motorcycles, trucks, and SUVs made their way toward the small Montana town. The veterans were arriving, their presence as steady and determined as the people they had come to protect. Each vehicle carried not just supplies but also the unwavering resolve of men and women who had faced adversity before and emerged stronger. Colonel Jack Murphy stood on the outskirts of town, waiting by a makeshift checkpoint set up to direct the incoming reinforcements. Beside him was Henry Jacobs, whose calm demeanor belied the hope and gratitude that swelled within him. It had been years since Henry had seen Murphy in person, but their bond was as strong as ever. The first group to arrive was a contingent of bikers, led by Griffin, whose rugged appearance matched his reputation as a dependable leader. The group's motorcycles rumbled to a halt, their riders dismounting and exchanging nods of respect with Murphy and Henry. "Colonel Murphy," Griffin said, extending a hand. Griffin Wallace heard the call and came running. "What's the situation?" Murphy shook Griffin's hand firmly. "Glad to have you here. We've got a gang terrorizing this town, preying on its people. We're here to send a message: this stops now." Griffin nodded, his expression hardening. "Understood. We'll do our part." Soon, more groups began to arrive. Retired medics, mechanics, and even former intelligence officers poured into Thunder Ridge, each bringing their unique skills. Among them was Clara Doc Hayes, her truck loaded with medical supplies. She greeted Murphy with a warm smile and a sharp salute. "Colonel, good to see you again," Doc said. "Looks like we've got a mission on our hands." Murphy returned the smile. "Good to see you too. Document. We're going to need your expertise." As the veterans settled in, setting up their base of operations at the old community center, Henry couldn't help but marvel at the sheer efficiency of their movements. They worked with the precision of a well-oiled machine, transforming the once quiet building into a hub of coordination and planning. Maps were pinned to walls, radios crackled with updates, and supplies were carefully organized. That evening, Murphy and Henry sat on the porch of Jacobs Hardware, sharing a quiet moment as the town's lights twinkled in the distance. The sounds of laughter and camaraderie drifted over from the community center, a testament to the bond these veterans shared. "Been a long time since we've done something like this," Henry said, his voice carrying a hint of nostalgia. Murphy leaned back in his chair, a faint smile crossing his lips. "Yeah, it's been a while. But it feels like yesterday, doesn't it?" Henry nodded. And for a moment, the two men were transported back in time. The air around them seemed to shift, the present fading into the vivid memories of a humid jungle half a world away. The roar of helicopter blades filled the air, drowning out the sound of gunfire below. Henry and Murphy sat side by side in the cramped confines of the Huey, their uniforms drenched in sweat and their faces grim. It was 1969. And their mission was as perilous as it was critical, extracting a pinned-down unit from deep within enemy territory. "You ready for this, Jacobs?" Murphy shouted over the noise, his eyes scanning the dense jungle below. Henry gripped his rifle tightly. "Always. Just make sure we get those boys out." The helicopter descended, bullets whizzing past its frame. The chaos on the ground was immediate, but the two men moved with precision, their training taking over. Together, they fought their way to the trapped soldiers, providing cover and dragging the wounded to safety. Amid the chaos, a promise was made, unspoken but deeply understood. "If we make it out of this," Murphy had said, his voice steady despite the danger, "we look out for each other. Always." Henry's response was simple: "You've got my word." The memory faded, and Henry found himself back on the porch, the sounds of the jungle replaced by the soft hum of crickets. He glanced at Murphy, who seemed lost in thought. We kept that promise, Jack, Henry said quietly. And now, we're keeping it for this town. Murphy nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. This isn't just about Thunder Ridge. It's about showing people that they don't have to live in fear, that there's strength in standing together. The next morning, the veterans held a briefing in the community center. Murphy stood at the front of the room, his presence commanding respect. All right, listen up, he began. We've got intel on the Crimson Talons. They've been operating out of a compound on the outskirts of town, using fear and intimidation to control the locals. Our goal is to make it clear that their time here is over. We do this smart, and we do it right. Griffin stepped forward, pointing to a map pinned to the wall. Their compound is heavily fortified, but they're not expecting us. We've got the element of surprise, and we need to use it. Doc chimed in. I'll set up a triage station here, she said, pointing to a nearby location on the map, just in case things get messy. Murphy nodded. Good. Remember, this isn't about taking them down with brute force. It's about showing them that their tactics won't work here. Let's get to work. The room buzzed with activity as the veterans split into teams. Each group assigned a specific task. Henry watched from the sidelines, his heart swelling with pride. These were his brothers and sisters, people who understood what it meant to fight for something greater than themselves. As the plan solidified, Murphy approached Henry. You ready for this, old friend? Henry gave a small smile. I was ready the moment they touched my flag. Murphy chuckled, clapping him on the shoulder. Then let's remind them who they're dealing with. With the veterans united and the plan in place, Thunder Ridge began to feel the first stirrings of hope. The battle ahead would be difficult, but the town was no longer alone. The Brotherhood was here, and together, they would show the Crimson Talons that their reign of terror was coming to an end. The morning air in Thunder Ridge carried a sense of anticipation as Henry Jacobs unlocked the doors to his hardware store. For decades, the shop had been a cornerstone of the community, but today it served a higher purpose. Rows of tools, nails, and lumber stood ready to be repurposed, not for fixing fences or building homes, but for a mission of unity and defense. With the veterans gathered and the town's hope hanging by a thread, the hardware store became a hub of strategy and coordination. Colonel Jack Murphy stood at the center of the store, surveying a large table now covered in maps, radio equipment, and hastily scrawled notes. Around him, veterans moved with purpose, setting up communication lines, organizing supplies, and marking potential weak points in the Crimson Talons operations. Henry joined him, rolling up his sleeves and diving into the work. Never thought I'd see my store like this, Henry said with a faint smile, glancing at the transformation. Murphy chuckled. I've seen operations run out of worse places. You've got everything we need here: tools, space, and good coffee. That's all we need to get started. Henry nodded, his expression growing serious. These people are counting on us, Jack. We can't let them down. Murphy clapped him on the shoulder. We won't. We've got the right people and the right plan. Now we just need to bring the town on board. As word spread about the veterans' arrival, townspeople began trickling into the hardware store. First came Lila Harper, her apron still dusted with flour from the diner. Then Martha Green and Harold Young, followed by a steady stream of farmers, shopkeepers, and curious onlookers. They filled the store with murmurs of doubt and hope, their eyes scanning the maps and the veterans who moved with quiet confidence. Lila was the first to speak. Henry, What's all this? You've got half the town talking about an army setting up shop here. Henry stepped forward, his voice steady. This isn't an army, Lila. These are veterans, men and women who've fought for what's right. Just like we're doing now. They're here to help us take back our town. Martha crossed her arms. And how exactly are we supposed to fight back? Those Talons have guns, numbers, and no fear of the law. Murphy stepped in, his presence commanding attention. We're not here to start a war, he said. We're here to show them that Thunder Ridge isn't afraid. Bullies thrive on fear. But when people stand together, they lose their power. That's what this is about. Harold nodded slowly. Strength in numbers. Huh. So what do you need from us? Henry looked at Murphy, then back at the group. We need everyone to be part of this. It's not just about the veterans, it's about the whole town coming together. If we show them we're united, they'll think twice before trying to take anything else from us. The store buzzed with activity over the next few days. Veterans held workshops to teach basic defense tactics, communication skills, and emergency preparedness. Townspeople joined eagerly, their initial hesitation replaced by determination. Parents brought their teenage children. Farmers offered their tools and vehicles. And shopkeepers volunteered to supply food and water. Henry's hardware store became more than a command center, it became a symbol of resilience. The veterans' stories, shared in quiet moments over coffee or during breaks from planning, inspired the townspeople. Griffin Wallace recounted his time leading rescue missions in Afghanistan, explaining how teamwork and trust had saved lives. Clara Doc Hayes shared tales of her days as an Army medic, emphasizing the importance of community support and overcoming adversity. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Henry stood in the store's backroom with Murphy. They watched as Lila and a group of teenagers practiced assembling and disassembling radios under Doc's guidance. Nearby, Griffin demonstrated how to fortify windows and doors against forced entry. Look at them, Henry said quietly. A week ago, they were scared to step outside. Now they're different, stronger. Murphy nodded. That's what happens when people realize they're not alone. Fear isolates, hope brings people together. And hope is what we're giving them. One of the most poignant moments came when Scorpion, one of the Crimson Talons who had started to question his allegiance, approached the hardware store. He lingered on the sidewalk, clearly conflicted, before finally stepping inside. The room fell silent as every eye turned to him. Henry approached calmly, his voice steady. What do you need? Scorpion shifted uncomfortably, glancing around the room. I just wanted to see what this was about, he said finally. You people, you're not like us. You actually care about this place. Murphy stepped forward. And you could too, he said simply. It's never too late to change sides. The tension in the room eased as Scorpion nodded slowly, then left without another word. His presence had stirred something in the veterans and townspeople alike, a realization that even the enemy could be swayed by the strength of their unity. By the week's end, Thunder Ridge was no longer a town living in fear. The streets buzzed with quiet determination. The once empty diner was filled with laughter and conversation. And the veterans' presence gave the people a sense of security they hadn't felt in months. On the eve of their first major confrontation with the Crimson Talons, Henry stood outside the hardware store, gazing at the freshly raised American flag fluttering in the evening breeze. Murphy joined him, hands in his pockets as he followed Henry's gaze. This town's different already, Henry said. I can feel it. Murphy nodded. It's stronger. And tomorrow, we'll make sure the Talons see just how strong. As the two men stood side by side, the light from the store cast their shadows long across the pavement. In that moment, Thunder Ridge was more than a town, it was a beacon of hope, resilience, and the power of unity. The Crimson Talons compound, hidden on the outskirts of Thunder Ridge, buzzed with unease. The once unshakable confidence of the gang was beginning to crumble, replaced by whispers of discontent and glances heavy with doubt. Their leader, Victor Kane, paced the length of the main building, his boots echoing against the concrete floor. His jaw was clenched, and his eyes burned with frustration. It had been weeks since the veterans arrived in town, and everything had changed. Where the Talons once roamed freely, their intimidation tactics going unchecked, they now faced a force unlike any they'd encountered before. The veterans operated with military precision, dismantling the Talons' network one step at a time. Routes once used for smuggling and intimidation were now monitored, their scouts outmaneuvered and outsmarted at every turn. Inside the compound's common room, tension was palpable. The gang members, dozens of them, sat in uneasy silence. Scorpion, Victor's right-hand man, leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching as Kane stormed in, his fury barely contained. "What the hell is going on out there?" Kane growled, slamming a fist onto the table. The sound reverberated through the room, drawing everyone's attention. "We've controlled this town for months, and now some washed-up soldiers are making fools of us?" Scorpion shifted but said nothing. He'd seen the veterans in action, and it was clear they weren't just washed-up soldiers. Their discipline, coordination, and refusal to be intimidated were something the Talons weren't prepared for. But Scorpion knew better than to voice his doubts to Kane in front of the others. One of the younger members, a wiry man named Jace, spoke up hesitantly. "They've got the whole town behind them now, boss. It's not just them, it's everyone. They're organized." Kane turned on Jace, his eyes narrowing. "And whose fault is that? We let them get too comfortable. We let Jacobs think he could stand up to us. This is what happens when you don't crush resistance before it starts." The room fell silent again as Kane's anger simmered. He turned to Scorpion. "You've been out there. You've seen what they're doing. Tell me we can beat this." Scorpion hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "They're smart, Vic. They're not just reacting, they're planning. Every move we make, they're 2 steps ahead. They've got people watching the roads, listening to chatter. It's not like anything we've dealt with before." Kane's face darkened. "So you're telling me they've got us beat? That we should just pack up and leave?" "I'm saying we need a different approach," Scorpion replied evenly. "If we keep hitting them head-on, we're just playing into their hands." Kane slammed his fist onto the table again, his frustration boiling over. "No! We don't run. And we don't back down. This is our town. They don't get to take it from us." Outside the compound, the gang's lower-ranking members whispered among themselves. Morale was low, and doubt was spreading like wildfire. The veterans had not only outmaneuvered them but had also shown the town that standing together could break the Talons' stranglehold. For the first time, the gang members felt fear, not of the veterans, but of the possibility that their reign might be coming to an end. Lightning, one of the gang's enforcers, sat on the hood of a rusted pickup, watching the compound with a troubled expression. He had always been loyal to Kane, but even he couldn't ignore the cracks forming in their operation. The veterans weren't just dismantling their tactics, they were dismantling the gang's confidence. "You think he's got a plan?" Jace asked, lighting a cigarette and leaning against the truck. Lightning shrugged, his gaze distant. "He's got a plan. Whether it's a good one, I don't know. But if Kane wants a fight, we're gonna give him a fight." Jace exhaled a cloud of smoke. You ever think about what happens if we lose? Lightning shot him a sharp look. We don't lose. Not as long as we've got Kane. But even as he said the words, a small part of him wondered if they were true. Back in town, the veterans continued their operations. Griffin Wallace led a team that had just intercepted one of the gang's supply routes, confiscating a cache of stolen goods. Clara Doc Hayes ran a training session for the townspeople, teaching them how to identify and report suspicious activity. The hardware store buzzed with activity as Henry Jacobs coordinated the growing resistance. They're feeling the heat, Griffin said during a debrief with Murphy. Every move they make. We're there. They're starting to crack. Murphy nodded. Good. But we can't get complacent. Kane's not the kind to give up easily. If he feels cornered, he'll get desperate. And desperate men are dangerous. Henry listened intently, his expression grim. What do you think he'll do? Murphy's gaze was steady. He'll lash out. Try to make a statement. We need to be ready for anything. Kane's desperation finally boiled over one night during a meeting in the compound's main hall. The gang's inner circle had gathered, their faces tense as they awaited their leader's plan. Kane stood at the head of the table, his voice low and dangerous. They think they've got us beat. They think they can push us out of this town. But they're wrong. We're not going anywhere. He pointed to a map spread across the table, marking locations in town where the veterans had gained ground. Tomorrow, we hit 'em where it hurts. We show 'em that we're still in control. Scorpion, leaning against the wall, crossed his arms. And what happens when they hit back? You know they're ready for us. Kane glared at him. Then we hit harder. We've got numbers. Firepower. They're nothing without the town backing them. And we're gonna remind everyone who runs this place. Scorpion didn't respond, but his silence spoke volumes. Lightning noticed the hesitation and frowned, wondering if his own doubts were written so plainly on his face. As the meeting broke up, Kane retreated to his office, slamming the door behind him. Alone, he poured himself a drink, the weight of his crumbling empire pressing down on him. The veterans had not only challenged his power but also exposed the fragility of the fear-based control he'd built. For the first time, Victor Kane felt something unfamiliar, the creeping edge of doubt. Meanwhile, at the hardware store, Murphy and Henry finalized preparations for the days ahead. The townspeople had rallied, and the veterans were ready. But they all knew the battle wasn't over. They'll make a move soon, Murphy said, his tone grave. We need to be ready for it. Henry nodded, his resolve unshaken. Let 'em come. They've already lost. They just don't know it yet. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel. It means so much to us. Now, let's get back to the story. The dim glow of the compound's overhead lights barely pierced the darkness as Scorpion leaned against the wall outside the common room, arms crossed and brow furrowed. He had always been Kane's trusted lieutenant, his position earned through loyalty and ruthless efficiency. But in the weeks since the veterans had arrived in Thunder Ridge, cracks had begun to form in the foundation of that loyalty. He wasn't blind to what was happening. The gang was unraveling, and Kane's desperation was becoming their downfall. Lightning joined him, his footsteps soft on the gravel. He had the same grim look Scorpion had seen reflected in the mirror every morning. The two men stood in silence for a moment, listening to the muffled arguments filtering out from the main building. He's losing it, Lightning finally said, his voice low. Scorpion exhaled sharply through his nose. No kidding. He thinks if we hit the veterans hard enough, they'll just give up. But it's not working. They're not like the others. They're not scared of us. Lightning nodded, shoving his hands into his jacket pockets. It's not just the vets. It's the whole town. They've got people standing up, fighting back. You can see it in their eyes. They're not afraid anymore. Scorpion turned to face him, his voice quiet but intense. And you think Kane cares about that? He'll burn this place to the ground before he admits he's losing. The words hung in the air like a bitter truth neither of them wanted to acknowledge. Lightning kicked at a loose rock, watching it skitter across the ground. What are we even doing here? Scorp, he asked after a long pause. This isn't what I signed up for. I thought we were just making a name for ourselves, carving out something for the crew. But this is just chaos. Scorpion didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared out into the darkness, his mind replaying the countless decisions that had brought him to this moment. Yeah, he said finally. It's not what I signed up for either. But I'm not sure we've got a way out. You know Kane. You're either with him, or you're against him. Lightning clenched his jaw, his frustration boiling just beneath the surface. Maybe it's time someone was against him. Later that night, Lightning sat alone in his room, the faint hum of the compound's generator his only company. He reached into his duffel bag and pulled out a small, battered photo. The edges were worn, and the image was slightly faded. But he knew it by heart, his father standing beside him in front of an old pickup truck, both of them grinning from ear to ear. His father, Daniel Ward, had been a man of principle, a mechanic by trade. He'd taught Lightning everything he knew about fixing engines and about life. Work hard, stay honest, and always keep your word, his father used to say. That's all a man really has at the end of the day. Lightning's fingers brushed over the photo as memories flooded back. He remembered the long hours they spent in the garage, his father's steady voice guiding him through the complexities of an engine rebuild. But it wasn't just the technical lessons that stuck with him, it was the stories his father shared. Moments of quiet wisdom that shaped the man Lightning wanted to be. One story, in particular, echoed in his mind. It was about a neighbor who had fallen on hard times, unable to pay for repairs on his truck. Lightning's father had fixed it anyway, refusing payment despite their own tight budget. "Why'd you do that, Dad?" Lightning had asked at the time. Daniel had smiled, wiping grease from his hands. "Because helping someone when they need it is what matters. If you've got the power to make someone's life better, you do it. That's the right thing to do, even if no one's watching." Lightning leaned back in his chair, staring at the photo. Somewhere along the way, he'd lost sight of those lessons. The thrill of the gang life, the promise of power and respect, had pulled him down a path his father wouldn't have recognized. But now, as he watched the Crimson Talons crumble under the weight of their own fear and Kane's blind rage, those old lessons resurfaced, louder than ever. He glanced at the photo one last time before slipping it back into his bag. "What would you do, Dad?" he whispered into the empty room. The answer was clear. His father wouldn't have stood by, letting Kane drag the town and everyone in it into chaos. He would have done something. Lightning's jaw tightened as the seed of change took root in his heart. The next morning, Scorpion found Lightning sitting on the steps of the compound, staring out at the horizon. He carried 2 mugs of coffee and handed one to his friend before taking a seat beside him. "Couldn't sleep either?" Scorpion asked. Lightning shook his head. "Too much on my mind." Scorpion sipped his coffee, the silence between them comfortable but heavy. Finally, he spoke. "You thinking about leaving?" Lightning's grip on the mug tightened. "Thinking about a lot of things. Mostly about how we got here. Feels like we're on the wrong side of this. Scorpion nodded slowly. You're not wrong. But walking away isn't exactly easy. Cain doesn't let people leave. Maybe it's time someone did. Lightning said. His voice firm. Look, Scorp. I don't know about you. But I'm tired of this. The veterans. The town, they're fighting for something real. We're just breaking things and calling it power. Scorpion stared into his coffee. His expression unreadable. You've got guts saying that out loud. You know what Cain would do if he heard you. Lightning met his gaze. Maybe he needs to hear it. Maybe it's time we all did. Scorpion didn't reply. But the look in his eyes said enough. He was questioning things too. And for the first time, Lightning felt like he wasn't alone. As the sun rose higher, casting its light over the compound, the two men sat in silence, their coffee growing cold. They didn't have answers yet. But for the first time, they had questions about Cain, the gang, and their own roles in the chaos consuming Thunder Ridge. And somewhere deep inside, both men began to feel the stirrings of something they hadn't felt in a long time, hope for redemption. Victor Cain sat alone in the dim light of his office. The bottle of whiskey on his desk barely touched. Maps of Thunder Ridge and surrounding areas were spread out before him, marked with red circles and lines detailing his plans. His frustration had reached a boiling point. For weeks, the veterans had outmaneuvered his gang, cutting off their supply lines, undermining their control, and turning the townspeople against them. Now, even some of his own men were starting to show cracks in their loyalty. Cain clenched his fists, his mind racing. He needed to make a statement so loud, so devastating, that no one in Thunder Ridge would dare stand against him again. His gaze fell on a crude sketch of Main Street, where Jacob's Hardware and other local businesses were marked in bold. If they want a war, Cain muttered to himself, I'll give them one they'll never forget. By midnight, Cain had gathered his most loyal men in the compound's main hall. The air was thick with tension as he outlined his plan. Explosives would be planted at key locations around town, and the detonation would send a clear message: Thunder Ridge belonged to the Crimson Talons, and resistance was futile. Scorpion stood at the edge of the room, arms crossed and face impassive, though his stomach churned with unease. Lightning was beside him. His jaw clenched as Cain described the operation in chilling detail. This isn't about just fighting back, Cain said, his voice low and menacing. This is about taking control. We're going to remind these people who runs this town. And if a few of them get caught in the crossfire, so be it. A murmur of approval rippled through the room. But Scorpion didn't join in. He knew this wasn't just reckless, it was suicidal. Destroying parts of the town would only solidify the veterans and the townspeople's resolve. But more than that, it was wrong. He glanced at Lightning, whose expression mirrored his own apprehension. Later that night, Scorpion found himself pacing the compound's courtyard, his mind racing. He'd spent years following Cain's orders. But this was different. This wasn't about intimidation or control, it was about destruction on a scale he couldn't stomach. And for what? To satisfy Cain's pride? Lightning approached, his footsteps soft against the gravel. You're thinking the same thing I am, he said quietly. Scorpion stopped pacing, turning to face him. It's madness. Light. This won't make them fear us, it'll make them hate us. We'll lose whatever control we have left. Lightning nodded. And he doesn't care. He's too far gone to see reason. Someone's got to stop this. Scorpion's jaw tightened. Yeah. But who? You? Me? We'd be signing our own death warrants. Lightning's eyes were steady. Maybe. But if we don't do something, a lot more people are going to get hurt. Scorpion made his decision just before dawn. He slipped away from the compound, careful to avoid patrols, and headed toward Thunder Ridge. The night air was cold, biting against his skin as he navigated the darkened roads. He'd always been good at moving unseen. It was part of what made him valuable to Cain. Now, he was using that skill to undermine him. By the time Scorpion reached Jacob's hardware, the first light of dawn was breaking over the horizon. He hesitated for a moment before knocking on the back door, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. After a tense pause, the door creaked open, revealing Henry Jacobs. The veteran's sharp eyes widened slightly at the sight of Scorpion, but he didn't hesitate to step aside and let him in. "You've got guts showing up here," Henry said, closing the door behind him. "What do you want?" Scorpion glanced around the room, noting the maps and equipment spread across the table. "I'm here to help," he said simply. Henry's eyes narrowed. "Help? You're one of Cain's men." "Not anymore," Scorpion replied, his voice steady. "He's planning something big, and it's going to get a lot of people killed. Explosives. Multiple locations. I can show you where." Henry studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded. "All right. But if this is some kind of trick..." "It's not," Scorpion said firmly. "I don't want any part of what Cain's doing. And neither does Lightning. He just doesn't know how to get out." Within the hour, Colonel Murphy and his team were assembled. Scorpion stood in the middle of the hardware store, surrounded by veterans who eyed him warily. He ignored their glares, focusing on the map in front of him. "Cain's got a stash of explosives here," Scorpion said, pointing to a location on the outskirts of town. "And here," he added, marking another spot near the diner. "He's planning to hit these areas to send a message. If we don't stop him, the whole town's going to suffer." Murphy's eyes narrowed as he processed the information. "Can you confirm these locations?" Scorpion nodded. "I've seen the supplies myself. He's planning to move them into position tonight." Murphy turned to Henry. "We're going to need all hands on deck for this. If Scorpion's telling the truth, we've got a narrow window to stop this before it starts." Henry nodded. "Then let's move." As the sun set over Thunder Ridge, the veterans split into teams, each assigned to one of the locations Scorpion had identified. They moved with precision and quiet determination, their military training evident in every step. Henry led a team to the diner, where they found a crate of explosives hidden in the alley. Murphy and Griffin's team intercepted a truck heading toward Main Street, its bed loaded with detonation equipment. Each discovery validated Scorpion's intel, solidifying his position as an unlikely ally. Meanwhile, Scorpion and Lightning worked from within the gang, subtly diverting supplies and delaying Cain's plans wherever possible. They knew they were walking a fine line, but they also knew it was their only chance to prevent catastrophe. By midnight, the veterans had secured the explosives and neutralized the immediate threat. Cain, unaware of the betrayal within his ranks, was left with nothing but rage when his plans fell apart. He stood in the compound's main hall, screaming at his men, his voice echoing through the building. "How did this happen?" Cain bellowed. "Who sold us out?" Scorpion and Lightning exchanged a brief glance but said nothing, their expressions carefully neutral. They knew the final confrontation was coming, and they were ready to face it together. As dawn broke over Thunder Ridge, the town stood united, its people emboldened by the veterans' actions and the quiet bravery of two men who had chosen to stand for what was right. The showdown with Cain was inevitable. But for the first time, Thunder Ridge was ready to fight back. The hardware store buzzed with activity as Colonel Jack Murphy and Henry Jacobs stood over a large map spread across the main counter. The map, marked with bright red circles, indicated the locations where Victor Kane had intended to plant explosives throughout Thunder Ridge. Around them, veterans and townspeople worked in hushed efficiency, gathering equipment and preparing for the night's operation. The clock was ticking, and every moment counted. "We need to move fast," Murphy said, his finger tracing a route from the outskirts of the town to Main Street. "Kane's men won't wait long once they realize their plans are falling apart. We need to neutralize those explosives and take back control of the town before they have time to regroup." Henry nodded, his expression grim but determined. "What's the play?" Murphy straightened, his commanding presence quieting the room. "We'll divide into 3 teams. Team Alpha will hit the main stash here," he said, pointing to the first red circle on the map near the diner. "Team Bravo will cover the second location, the old mill on the outskirts. Team Charlie will secure Main Street and intercept any of Kane's men trying to move into position." Griffin Wallace stepped forward, his leather jacket creaking as he adjusted his stance. "I'll take Alpha. We've got enough muscle to handle whatever they've got." "Doc's with you," Murphy added. "She'll handle any injuries if things get messy." Clara Doc Hayes gave a firm nod, slinging a med kit over her shoulder. "Let's just hope it doesn't come to that." Murphy turned to Henry. "You and I will lead Bravo. We need to ensure that stash at the mill is neutralized. If Kane's planning to use it as a backup, we can't let it stay in play." Henry gave a sharp nod. "Got it." Finally, Murphy looked at Scorpion and Lightning, who stood off to the side, their faces tense. "You two are with Charlie. If Kane's men are moving through Main Street, you'll know their tactics better than anyone. Guide our people and keep them one step ahead." Scorpion exchanged a glance with Lightning before stepping forward. "We won't let you down," he said, his voice steady. Murphy's gaze lingered on them for a moment before he nodded. "Then let's get to work. Team Alpha, the diner." Griffin led his team through the quiet streets, their footsteps muffled by the cold night air. The diner's alley was dimly lit, and the sound of muffled conversation from inside hinted at the presence of Kane's men. Griffin raised his hand, signaling the group to stop. He turned to document, "Keep back until we've secured the area." Doc nodded, crouching behind a stack of crates. Griffin and 2 others approached the stash, their movements slow and deliberate. They spotted the crate of explosives tucked near the dumpster, a crude timer visible on top. 2 gang members stood nearby, smoking and laughing quietly, oblivious to the danger approaching. Griffin motioned to his team, and within seconds, the veterans moved in. The first man was subdued with a swift strike, and the second surrendered without a fight, his hands raised in panic. "Document, you're up," Griffin called. Doc rushed to the crate, her sharp eyes assessing the setup. "Basic timer rig," she muttered. "Sloppy work." With practiced precision, she disabled the device, cutting the wires and rendering the explosives harmless. Griffin secured the 2 gang members, tying their hands and leaving them for local law enforcement. "One down," he said into his radio. "Alpha's clear. Team Bravo, the mill." Henry and Murphy approached the mill under the cover of darkness. Their team fanned out in a defensive formation. The mill was eerily silent, its weathered walls casting long shadows in the moonlight. Murphy held up a fist, signaling the team to halt. "They're inside," he whispered. 2 on the main floor. At least 1 upstairs." Henry motioned to 2 veterans to cover the rear entrance while he and Murphy moved toward the front. They slipped inside, the old wooden floor creaking beneath their boots. The gang members were gathered near a table, inspecting another crate of explosives. Murphy gestured to Henry, and the two moved in unison, catching the men off guard. Within moments, the gang members were disarmed and restrained. Murphy examined the crate, his sharp eyes scanning the setup. "This one's more sophisticated," he said, pointing to a complex series of wires and a larger timer. Henry crouched beside him. "Can you disarm it?" Murphy nodded. "Yeah. But it'll take time. Cover me." As Murphy worked, the rest of the team secured the area. The tension was palpable as the timer ticked down. But Murphy's steady hands never faltered. With a final snip of the wires, the timer went dark. "Bravo's clear," Murphy said into his radio. "Moving to regroup." Team Charlie, Main Street. Scorpion and Lightning led their team through the heart of Thunder Ridge. The quiet street illuminated by scattered streetlights. They knew this was where Kane's men would make their move. And they were ready. "They'll try to use the side alleys," Scorpion said, pointing to a narrow passage between two buildings. "We need to cut them off before they get through." The team split up, taking positions along the street. Lightning and two veterans moved toward the alley, their weapons drawn. They didn't have to wait long. Two gang members emerged, carrying a smaller crate of explosives. Lightning stepped into their path, his voice firm. "Drop it." The gang members hesitated, their eyes darting around for an escape. But when Scorpion appeared behind them, their resistance crumbled. They dropped the crate and raised their hands. "Good call," Scorpion said, securing the explosives. "Let's get this out of here." By the time the sun began to rise, all three teams had completed their missions. The explosives were secured. Kane's men were scattered, and Thunder Ridge remained standing. At the hardware store, the teams regrouped, their faces reflecting a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. Murphy addressed the group, his voice filled with pride. "We've sent a message tonight," he said. "Kane and his men thought they could intimidate this town, but we showed them otherwise. This isn't just a victory for us, it's a victory for Thunder Ridge." Henry stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over the room. "And it's not over yet. Kane's not going to back down easily. But tonight, we prove that this town won't be broken. We stand together." The room erupted in applause, the unity among the veterans and townspeople stronger than ever. Thunder Ridge had faced its greatest threat and emerged victorious. But the battle was far from over. Kane would retaliate. And when he did, they would be ready. The tension in the Crimson Talons compound was electric. The plan to wreak havoc in Thunder Ridge had been foiled, and Victor Kane's frustration simmered on the edge of violence. The gang leader paced the main hall, his boots striking the concrete floor with sharp, deliberate force. His men, scattered in small clusters, avoided his gaze. They had seen this side of Kane before, and it rarely ended well. Lightning stood near the back of the room, his arms crossed as he leaned against the wall. The failure of Kane's plan wasn't a surprise to him. He had known from the start that it was a desperate, reckless scheme. But watching Kane now, consumed by his own fury, Lightning felt the final threads of loyalty unraveling. Kane's voice cut through the silence. "You useless cowards. They're out there, making fools of us. And you just stand here doing nothing?" He slammed his fist onto a nearby table, sending a stack of papers to the floor. "This town belongs to us. I don't care what it takes, we're taking it back." Lightning's jaw tightened. He could see the fear in the other gang members, the way they flinched at Kane's outburst. It wasn't respect that held them here, it was fear. And fear, Lightning realized, Wasn't enough to hold him anymore. Kane's gaze locked onto Lightning. "You've been quiet," he said. His tone laced with suspicion. "Got something to say?" Lightning straightened, pushing off the wall. He took a step forward, his eyes meeting Kane's without flinching. "Yeah. I've got something to say," he replied. "This is over. Kane. You're done." The room fell silent, the weight of Lightning's words hanging in the air. Kane's expression shifted from disbelief to anger, his fists clenching at his sides. "What did you just say?" Kane growled, taking a step toward him. Lightning didn't back down. "You heard me. This isn't about the town anymore, it's about you. Your pride. Your ego. You've dragged us into a fight we can't win because you can't stand losing control. But look around. Kane. You've already lost." A murmur rippled through the room as the other gang members exchanged uneasy glances. Kane's face twisted with rage. "You've got a lot of nerve. Lightning," he spat. "You think you can talk to me like that and walk out of here?" "I'm not walking out," Lightning said firmly. "But you are." The confrontation escalated quickly. Kane reached for the gun at his side. But Lightning was faster. With a swift motion, he closed the distance between them, grabbing Kane's wrist and twisting it sharply. The weapon clattered to the floor, and Lightning shoved Kane backward into the table. The gang leader's shock was evident. No one had ever stood up to him like this. And for a brief moment, he looked uncertain. But his pride wouldn't let him back down. "You're making a big mistake," Kane snarled, his voice low and dangerous. "You think you can take me on? You think you're better than me?" Lightning didn't hesitate. "I don't think. I know." The room erupted into chaos as Kane lunged at Lightning. The two men grappled, their struggle knocking over chairs and sending the table's contents flying. The other gang members watched in stunned silence, unsure of whether to intervene or let the fight play out. Meanwhile, outside the compound, the veterans were moving into position. Colonel Murphy, Henry Jacobs, and Griffin Wallace coordinated the operation with precision, using the intel provided by Scorpion and Lightning to navigate the compound's defenses. "We've got movement inside," one of the veterans reported over the radio. "Looks like it's getting heated." Murphy nodded. "Good. Let's use the distraction to our advantage. Move in and secure the perimeter." The team advanced, their movements silent and calculated. They knew the importance of timing. If they acted too soon, they risked losing the element of surprise. But if they waited too long, the situation inside could spiral out of control. Back in the compound, the fight between Lightning and Kane raged on. Kane's strength was undeniable, but Lightning's determination gave him the upper hand. He ducked a wild punch and countered with a solid strike to Kane's jaw, sending the gang leader stumbling. "It's over, Kane," Lightning said, his breathing heavy. "You've got nothing left." Kane glared at him, his face twisted with fury. "You think you've won?" he spat. "This isn't over until I say it is." Lightning shook his head. "It was over the moment you stopped caring about anyone but yourself." Before Kane could respond, the sound of footsteps and shouted commands filled the air. The veterans had breached the compound, their presence a sudden and undeniable force. The gang members, caught off guard, quickly surrendered, their weapons dropping to the floor. Murphy entered the main hall, his sharp eyes taking in the scene. He saw Kane on the floor, his lip bloodied, and Lightning standing over him, his stance steady and resolute. "Looks like you had things under control," Murphy said, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Lightning stepped back, allowing the veterans to take Kane into custody. "Just finishing what he started," he replied. Kane was hauled to his feet, his defiance replaced by a sullen silence. The once feared leader of the Crimson Talons had been brought low, his empire reduced to rubble by the very people he had sought to dominate. As the sun rose over Thunder Ridge, the compound was secured, and the remaining gang members were rounded up. The townspeople gathered in the square, their faces a mix of relief and hope as they watched the veterans escort Kane and his men through the streets. Henry stood beside Lightning, his hand resting on the younger man's shoulder. "You did the right thing," he said. "Took a lot of guts to stand up to him." Lightning nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I'm just sorry it took me so long to see it." Henry gave him a reassuring squeeze. "What matters is that you did. And because of that, this town has a chance to heal." As the crowd dispersed, the veterans began dismantling the compound's remnants, their focus shifting to rebuilding and restoring order. Thunder Ridge had faced its darkest hour, but with the courage of its people and the strength of the veterans, it had emerged stronger than ever. And for Lightning, it was a new beginning. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was walking it with purpose. The morning air in Thunder Ridge was crisp, carrying with it a sense of renewal and quiet triumph. The rising sun bathed the town in golden light, illuminating the aftermath of the confrontation that had defined its future. The Crimson Talons' hold on the town was broken, their leader Victor Kane in custody, and their power dismantled. For the first time in months, the streets were alive with hope. Henry Jacobs stood on the porch of his hardware store, the American flag fluttering proudly in the breeze. He sipped his coffee, his gaze sweeping over Main Street as townspeople worked together to clean up the remnants of the gang's reign. Behind him, Colonel Jack Murphy emerged from the store, a cup of coffee in hand and a thoughtful expression on his face. "You look deep in thought, Jack," Henry said, his voice steady but tinged with weariness. Murphy nodded, stepping beside him. "Just thinking about how far we've come, and how much it cost." The two men stood in silence for a moment, watching as children helped sweep sidewalks and shop owners repaired broken windows. It was a scene of resilience and recovery, but the weight of what had transpired was not lost on either of them. "We did what needed to be done," Henry said, breaking the silence. "But you're right. There's always a cost." Murphy took a sip of his coffee. "We've both seen it before. The scars people carry, the things they've lost. Even when you win, it leaves a mark." Henry nodded, his gaze distant. "It's different this time, though. We weren't fighting for a country or a mission overseas. This was about home. About people we know, faces we see every day. That makes it feel heavier somehow." Murphy sighed. "And worth it. This town, these people, they needed us. They needed to see that they weren't alone, that they could stand up and fight back. And now they're stronger for it." Henry glanced at him, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "You always were the optimist." Murphy chuckled. "Don't spread that around. I've got a reputation to maintain." As the day progressed, the town began to prepare for a celebration. Word had spread quickly about the veterans' role in liberating Thunder Ridge, and the townspeople were determined to show their gratitude. Lila Harper, the owner of the diner, had organized a gathering in the town square, complete with food, music, and speeches. Henry and Murphy arrived together, greeted by cheers and applause from the crowd. The sight was humbling, families reunited, laughter filling the air, and the scars of the past few months already beginning to fade. Lila approached them with a warm smile. You two are the guests of honor, she said, gesturing to a small stage set up in front of the gazebo. Don't think you're getting out of a speech. Henry shook his head. I'm not much for speeches. Murphy clapped him on the shoulder. Good thing I am. When it came time for the speeches, Murphy took the stage first. The crowd fell silent as he stood before them, his presence commanding but approachable. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice steady and clear. It's an honor to stand here today. Not as a soldier or a leader, but as a witness to your courage. What happened here wasn't just a victory for Thunder Ridge, it was a testament to the strength and resilience of this community. He paused, letting his words sink in. You stood together, shoulder to shoulder, and refused to let fear dictate your lives. That's not something anyone can take away from you. And while my brothers and sisters in arms were here to help, it was your spirit that made this possible. The crowd erupted in applause, and Murphy stepped back, gesturing for Henry to join him. Reluctantly, Henry stepped forward, adjusting his hat as he addressed the crowd. I'm not much for speeches, he said, earning a ripple of laughter. But I'll say this, I've lived in Thunder Ridge my whole life, and I've never been prouder to call it home. You all showed what this town is made of. And that's something no gang, no bully, no force in the world can take from us. He paused, his voice softening. It wasn't easy, and it never will be. But as long as we stick together, there's nothing we can't overcome. The crowd's applause was thunderous, a reflection of the gratitude and admiration they felt for Henry, Murphy, and the veterans. As the celebration continued, Henry found himself reflecting on the events of the past weeks. He watched as Scorpion and Lightning mingled with the townspeople, their presence a quiet reminder of the possibility of redemption. The two former gang members had taken the first steps toward change, and Henry had no doubt that they would make the most of their second chance. Murphy joined him, following his gaze. They've come a long way, he said, nodding towards Scorpion and Lightning. Henry nodded. So have we all. It's been a long road. But seeing this, it makes it worth it. Murphy's expression softened. You know, Henry, I think this town will be all right. They've got something special here. And a lot of that is thanks to you. Henry shook his head. Not just me. It was all of us. You, the veterans, the townspeople, it took everyone to make this happen. Murphy smiled. That's the truth. And it's a reminder that sometimes the fight is worth it. As the sun set over Thunder Ridge, casting the town in a warm, golden glow, Henry and Murphy stood side by side, their hearts full of gratitude and hope. The battle had been won, and while the scars would remain, they were a testament to the strength and unity that had carried them through. And as the town celebrated its liberation, the veterans and townspeople alike knew that they had not only reclaimed their home but had also found something even more valuable, a renewed sense of community and the courage to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The morning after the celebration, Thunder Ridge awoke to a fresh start. The streets, still littered with remnants of the battle, were alive with activity as townspeople and veterans began the process of rebuilding. It was as if the town itself had taken a deep breath and was ready to exhale a renewed sense of purpose. Henry Jacobs arrived at the town square early, his hands tucked into the pockets of his work jacket. He paused to admire the sight of neighbors helping one another, children sweeping the sidewalks, business owners repairing broken windows, and veterans lending their skills to reinforce structures. The sense of unity was palpable. Colonel Jack Murphy stood nearby, coordinating efforts with his usual calm authority. He spotted Henry and waved him over. "Morning, Henry," Murphy said. handing him a clipboard filled with lists of tasks and assignments. We've got teams heading to the north side to repair the community center. Thought you might want to lead that effort. Henry took the clipboard with a nod. Happy to. Feels good to be building something instead of tearing it down. Murphy smiled. That's the spirit. And it looks like the town's with you on that. By mid-morning, the square was bustling. Scorpion and Lightning worked side by side with the townspeople, hauling lumber and repairing the frame of a storefront damaged in the fight. Their presence had initially drawn skeptical looks, but their actions spoke louder than words. They worked tirelessly, their determination to prove themselves evident in every movement. Lila Harper, carrying a tray of lemonade for the workers, approached them with a cautious smile. You boys have been busy, she said, offering them each a glass. Lightning accepted with a grateful nod. Just trying to make things right. Ma'am, Scorpion added. We've got a lot to make up for. Figured this was a good place to start. Lila's smile softened. Well, you're doing a fine job. And for what it's worth, people notice when someone's trying to change. Keep it up. As she walked away, Lightning turned to Scorpion. You think they'll ever really trust us? Scorpion shrugged, wiping sweat from his brow. Maybe not. But trust isn't given, it's earned. We just have to keep showing them we're not the same people we used to be. At the community center, Henry supervised a team of volunteers as they replaced broken windows and repaired the roof. The building, once a symbol of the town's resilience, had suffered significant damage during the Talons' occupation. Now, it was being restored to its former glory. Murphy arrived with a truckload of supplies, hopping out of the driver's seat with a clipboard in hand. Got your roofing materials here, Henry, he said, gesturing to the load. Think you can get it done by the end of the day? Henry grinned. With this crew? No problem. As the volunteers unloaded the truck, Murphy leaned against the side, watching the progress. You know, he said, what's happening here is rare. Most places, after something like this, people stay scared. They keep their heads down. But not here. Henry nodded. This town's got a backbone. They just needed a reminder of what they're capable of. And maybe a little help finding their footing again. Murphy chuckled. Well, they found it. And they've got you to thank for a lot of that. Henry waved him off. It was everyone. Jack. You. The veterans. The townspeople, even Scorpion and Lightning. Speaking of, how are they doing? Murphy's expression grew thoughtful. Better than I expected. They've got a long road ahead. But they're walking it. And they've got you to guide them. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Scorpion and Lightning sat on the steps of the town's rebuilt gazebo, watching the lights flicker on in the surrounding buildings. Henry joined them, carrying a thermos of coffee and 3 cups. He poured the steaming liquid, handing a cup to each of them. Hard day's work deserves a good cup of coffee, Henry said, settling onto the steps beside them. Lightning took a sip, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Feels good. You know? Doing something that matters. Scorpion nodded. Yeah. For the first time in a long time. It feels like we're doing the right thing. Henry studied them for a moment before speaking. You boys have come a long way. You didn't have to stick around. But you did. That says a lot. Lightning glanced at him, his expression earnest. It's because of you, Henry. You didn't give up on us, even when we didn't deserve it. Henry shook his head. Everyone deserves a second chance. What matters is what you do with it. And you're doing good. Don't lose sight of that. Scorpion leaned back, letting out a long breath. What do we do now? After all this is over? Henry's gaze turned thoughtful. That's up to you. But if you want my advice, find something worth building. Something you can be proud of. Whether it's here in Thunder Ridge or somewhere else. Make it count. The three men sat in silence for a while, the weight of Henry's words settling over them. The town around them was quiet. The only sounds the rustling of leaves and the distant hum of conversation. It was a moment of peace. A stark contrast to the chaos that had gripped Thunder Ridge just weeks before. The next morning, Scorpion and Lightning approached Murphy as he prepared to leave. The veterans had begun to disperse, their mission in Thunder Ridge complete. But Scorpion and Lightning had one last request. "Colonel," Scorpion said, his tone respectful, "we were hoping to ask you something." Murphy raised an eyebrow. "What's on your mind?" Lightning stepped forward. "We want to do more. To help. What we did with the Talons, it's not who we want to be. You and Henry. You showed us there's another way. We want to be part of that." Murphy studied them for a long moment before nodding. "All right. If you're serious about this, there's a place for you. We've got programs, training, ways for you to make a difference. But it's not easy. You'll have to work harder than you ever have." Scorpion's expression was firm. "We're ready for it." Murphy extended his hand, and both men shook it in turn. "Then let's get started." As Thunder Ridge continued to rebuild, Scorpion and Lightning's transformation became a symbol of the town's resilience and the power of redemption. Guided by Henry and Murphy, they began their journey toward a better future. One step at a time. And for the first time in years, Thunder Ridge looked to the future with hope in its heart and strength in its spirit. The sun rose over Thunder Ridge, casting its golden glow across the town square. The battle scars of recent weeks were slowly fading as repairs continued. But the impact of the veterans' work remained etched in the hearts of the townspeople. Life was returning to normal. But something new had taken root, a sense of purpose that extended beyond the town's borders. Henry Jacobs stood outside his hardware store, watching as a small group of veterans unloaded supplies from a truck. The sign above the newly renovated community center now bore a fresh addition, Veterans Brotherhood Chapter, Thunder Ridge. The establishment of the local chapter was Murphy's brainchild. But it was a shared effort, born of the unity forged in the town's darkest days. Colonel Jack Murphy arrived moments later, his sharp eyes scanning the bustling activity. He joined Henry, his expression a mix of pride and determination. "It's a good start," Murphy said, nodding toward the building. "We've got the space, the people, and the support. Now it's about keeping the momentum going." Henry smiled. "This town owes you more than they can ever repay, Jack. This chapter, it's going to change lives." Murphy's expression softened. "We all had a hand in this, Henry. And if we do this right, it won't just be Thunder Ridge. This could be the start of something much bigger." Inside the community center, the atmosphere was electric. Veterans and townspeople worked side by side to organize supplies and set up spaces for training, counseling, and community events. Scorpion and Lightning, now fully integrated into the team, took charge of organizing a storage area for emergency response gear. Lila Harper entered carrying a tray of fresh-baked muffins, her smile lighting up the room. "Thought you all could use a little fuel to keep going," she said, setting the tray on a table. Lightning grinned. "You're spoiling us, Lila." She winked. "Just making sure you don't run out of steam." Scorpion turned to Lightning after she left. "Hard to believe how far we've come. Feels like just yesterday we were on the wrong side of all this. Lightning nodded, his expression serious. Yeah. But we've got a shot to make it right. And I don't plan on wasting it. By mid-afternoon, the community center was fully operational. The first order of business was a meeting to outline the chapter's mission. Murphy stood at the front of the room, addressing the gathered veterans and townspeople. This chapter is more than just a place for veterans, he began. It's a resource for the entire community. We're here to provide support, training, and protection. But more importantly, we're here to show people that they don't have to face their challenges alone. He paused, letting his words sink in. What we accomplished in Thunder Ridge was just the beginning. There are other towns out there facing their own battles. And they need to know it's possible to fight back. That's where we come in. The room erupted into applause. The energy palpable. Plans were already in motion to extend their reach. And the veterans were eager to take their mission beyond Thunder Ridge. In the weeks that followed, word of the chapter's success spread like wildfire. Local news outlets covered the story, highlighting the transformation of Thunder Ridge and the role of the veterans in its recovery. The coverage caught the attention of neighboring communities, many of which were grappling with their own issues of crime, corruption, and fear. Requests for help began pouring in. A town in Idaho facing gang-related violence reached out, followed by a rural community in Wyoming struggling with a drug epidemic. Each plea for assistance reinforced the need for the Veterans Brotherhood to expand its mission. Murphy and Henry met frequently to discuss the logistics of their growing operation. Late one evening, they sat in the hardware store's back office, surrounded by maps, schedules, and stacks of paperwork. If we're going to help other towns, we'll need more resources, Murphy said, his brow furrowed. Trucks, equipment, communication systems, it adds up fast. Henry nodded. We've got the manpower. But you're right. If we're serious about this, we need funding. Have you thought about reaching out to donors or grants? Murphy leaned back in his chair, considering the idea. It's worth exploring. But I'd rather keep this grassroots for as long as we can. People trust us because we're not some big organization. We're their neighbors. Their friends. That's what makes this work. Henry smiled. Then we start small. Help one town at a time. Build connections. And let the results speak for themselves. The rest will fall into place. The first outreach mission took the veterans to Pine Hollow, a small town in Idaho plagued by a local gang that had taken advantage of the community's isolation. Murphy, Henry, Scorpion, and a team of volunteers arrived with supplies and a plan. The residents of Pine Hollow were wary at first, their trust eroded by years of neglect and fear. But as the veterans began working alongside them, building barricades, repairing damaged homes, and organizing safety patrols, the walls of skepticism began to crumble. One evening, after a long day of work, Scorpion sat with a group of teenagers around a small campfire. He listened as they shared their stories of fear and frustration, their voices tinged with anger and hopelessness. I know what it feels like, Scorpion said, his tone earnest. I was on the other side once. Part of the problem. But people gave me a chance to change. To do something that mattered. And if I can do it, so can you. The teenagers listened intently, their expressions softening. For the first time in years, they saw a glimmer of hope, not just for their town, but for themselves. By the time the veterans left Pine Hollow, the community was on a path to reclaiming its strength. The success of the mission only fueled the momentum of the Veterans Brotherhood. Requests for assistance continued to grow, and the network of chapters began to expand. Back in Thunder Ridge, the community center became a hub of activity, coordinating missions, training new volunteers, and serving as a beacon of hope for the surrounding region. The veterans' work had transformed not only the town but also the lives of those they helped. Henry stood on the porch of the hardware store one evening, watching as a convoy of trucks rolled out of town, headed for their next mission. Murphy joined him, his expression a mix of pride and determination. "Looks like we're doing it," Murphy said. Henry nodded. "One town at a time. Just like we planned." Murphy smiled. "And we're just getting started." As the convoy disappeared into the horizon, the lights of Thunder Ridge shone brightly behind them, a symbol of what was possible when people stood together. For Henry, Murphy, and the veterans, the mission was clear: to bring hope, strength, and unity to every community in need, one town at a time. The soft glow of the setting sun bathed Thunder Ridge in warm hues as Scorpion sat on the steps of the town's community center, his gaze fixed on the horizon. In his hands, he held a worn leather notebook, its pages filled with scrawled notes and sketches from a time that now felt like another life. Lightning sat beside him, the silence between them comfortable but heavy with unspoken thoughts. "You ever think about what we'd be doing if things hadn't changed?" Lightning asked, his voice low, as if afraid to disturb the peace of the moment. Scorpion let out a slow breath, flipping through the notebook. "All the time," he admitted. "I think about the people we hurt, the choices we made. Feels like another person did all that." Lightning nodded, his gaze dropping to his hands. "It's hard to believe how close we came to losing everything. And for what? A guy like Kane who didn't care about anyone but himself." Scorpion closed the notebook and looked at Lightning. "We let it happen. Though. We let his anger and his pride control us. But not anymore." Henry Jacobs watched the two men from a distance, leaning against the doorframe of the community center. He'd seen this moment coming for weeks now, a time when Scorpion and Lightning would have to confront the weight of their past actions. He approached them slowly, his boots crunching softly against the gravel. "Mind if I join you?" Henry asked, gesturing to the empty spot beside them. Scorpion and Lightning shifted to make room, their respect for Henry evident in the way they straightened their postures. Henry settled onto the steps, letting the silence linger before speaking. "Reflection's a good thing," he said. "It's how we grow. But don't let it weigh you down so much that you forget to move forward." Scorpion hesitated before responding. "It's hard, Henry. Every time I think about what we did, what I did, it feels like I'll never be able to make up for it." Henry studied him for a moment, his expression steady but kind. "You're right. You can't erase the past. None of us can. But you can take responsibility for it. And you can use it to guide the choices you make now. That's how redemption works. It's not about being perfect, it's about doing better every day." Lightning looked at Henry, his brow furrowed. "How do you know when you've done enough? When you've actually made things right?" Henry gave a small smile. "You don't. And maybe you never will. But what matters is that you keep trying. You keep showing up, doing the work, and helping others. That's what makes the difference." Later that evening, Henry invited the two men into the hardware store's back office. The room was cluttered with tools, paperwork, and framed photos from Henry's long life. He pulled a chair up to his desk and motioned for Scorpion and Lightning to sit. "I want to show you something," Henry said, opening a drawer and pulling out a small, weathered box. Inside were medals, patches, and a faded black and white photo of a younger Henry with his platoon in Vietnam. "These men," Henry said, tapping the photo, "were my brothers. We went through hell together. We made mistakes. And we lost people. But we leaned on each other to get through it. That's what I see in you too. You've got the same bond. Use it. Scorpion picked up one of the patches, running his fingers over the frayed edges. You think we can ever be like that? Build something like you did? Henry's voice was firm. You already are. What you do from here, that's what matters. The Brotherhood's here to help you. And so am I. But the work, that's on you. Lightning leaned forward, his expression resolute. We're ready. Whatever it takes. We're ready. Henry nodded. Good. Because this isn't just about you anymore. It's about the people who need you. Remember that. In the weeks that followed, Scorpion and Lightning threw themselves into their new roles within the Veterans Brotherhood. They led training sessions for townspeople, helped with rebuilding efforts, and offered their skills to neighboring communities in need. Each day brought new challenges, but they faced them with a determination that inspired those around them. One afternoon, as the three of them worked to repair a fence on the outskirts of town, Lightning paused, leaning on his hammer. You know, Henry, I never thought I'd feel proud of something again. But this, helping people, being part of something bigger, it feels right. Henry smiled, his hands steady as he worked. That's because it is right. And the more you do it, the more you'll see what you're capable of. Scorpion joined them, wiping sweat from his brow. I still think about the past. But now, it's more like a reminder. A reminder of where I don't want to end up again. Henry placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. That's all it needs to be. A guide. Not a weight. Keep looking forward. And you'll do just fine. As the sun set that evening, Scorpion and Lightning stood together, watching the town's lights flicker on. The scars of their past would never fully disappear. But they had found a path forward, one built on responsibility, redemption, and the quiet strength of those who had guided them along the way. The sun cast long shadows over the Veterans Brotherhood's headquarters in Thunder Ridge. What had once been a quiet community center was now a bustling hub of activity, filled with veterans coordinating outreach programs, training locals, and organizing supplies for neighboring towns. The Brotherhood had become a symbol of resilience, a beacon for communities in need of strength. But as their influence grew, so too did the attention they garnered, not all of it welcome. Henry Jacobs sat in his usual spot in the center's meeting room, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. Across from him, Colonel Jack Murphy reviewed a growing stack of reports. They detailed everything from the progress of the Brotherhood's latest missions to troubling whispers about new threats emerging on the horizon. It was only a matter of time, Murphy said, breaking the silence. He slid a report across the table to Henry. We've been making waves. And now the people who rely on fear and control are starting to notice. Henry picked up the report, his brow furrowing as he read. It detailed sightings of unfamiliar vehicles in the area, instances of intimidation targeting Brotherhood members, and even subtle warnings from law enforcement contacts, corporate security firms, and organized crime. Henry muttered, setting the paper down. That's a hell of a combination. Murphy nodded. We've stepped on a lot of toes. Criminal organizations see us as a direct threat to their operations. And those corporate outfits don't like the idea of us undermining their for-profit security models. To them, we're bad for business. Henry's jaw tightened. So, what do we do? Stand by while they try to take us apart? Murphy's eyes hardened. We prepare. The way we always do. Across town, Scorpion and Lightning were busy leading a self-defense training session for local teenagers. The class had grown in popularity, with more participants showing up each week. Today, the gym was packed. The sound of punching bags and encouraging voices filling the air. Lightning adjusted the stance of one of the younger boys. His tone patient but firm. Keep your balance centered. If you're off balance, you're vulnerable. Try again. The boy nodded. Determination in his eyes as he threw another punch. Lightning smiled. That's it. Keep it up. Nearby, Scorpion demonstrated defensive techniques. His movements precise and deliberate. As he finished, he noticed a man lingering near the entrance, watching the class with a disapproving expression. The man was dressed in a sharp suit, his posture stiff, and his eyes calculating. Scorpion walked over, his instincts on high alert. "Can I help you?" he asked. His tone neutral but firm. The man offered a thin smile. "Just observing. Interesting setup you have here. A lot of passion." Lightning joined them, his presence adding weight to the interaction. "We're here to help people, not entertain spectators." "Who are you?" The man's smile didn't falter. "Just someone with an interest in the community. Tell your Colonel Murphy that Alexander Crane says hello. We'll be seeing more of each other soon." With that, Crane turned and left, his words hanging in the air like a warning. That evening, Scorpion and Lightning relayed the encounter to Murphy and Henry. The name Alexander Crane was new, but his presence and his message was unmistakable. "Corporate security," Murphy said, leaning back in his chair. "Crane's with one of those firms that contracts out to high-profile clients. They're not here to help, they're here to protect their interests." Henry folded his arms. "And by interests, you mean the criminals and companies who don't want us interfering with their operations?" Murphy nodded. "Exactly. They see us as competition. Worse, they see us as a challenge to their authority. They're not going to sit back and let us keep growing." Lightning's expression darkened. "So what do we do? Wait for them to make the first move?" Murphy shook his head. "No. We strengthen our defenses, both physical and informational. We've got to be ready for whatever they throw at us." In the days that followed, the Veterans Brotherhood ramped up their preparations. Patrols were increased, and defensive measures around the community center were reinforced. Murphy brought in experts to conduct advanced tactical training, ensuring that everyone was ready for the challenges ahead. Henry took a hands-on approach, working with the townspeople to fortify their homes and businesses. He spent hours teaching basic security techniques, from installing stronger locks to setting up simple alarm systems. The efforts were met with gratitude and determination, as the people of Thunder Ridge refused to be intimidated. Meanwhile, Scorpion and Lightning focused on gathering intelligence. They reached out to their old contacts, piecing together information about Crane's operation and the criminal organizations backing him. What they discovered was sobering. "They're not just watching us," Scorpion reported during a strategy meeting. "They're planning something, coordinating with groups in neighboring towns. It's like they're trying to box us in." Murphy nodded. "Then we need to break out of that box. Keep the initiative on our side." One night, as Henry and Murphy sat on the porch of the hardware store, they reflected on the growing challenges facing the Brotherhood. "It's funny," Henry said, sipping his coffee. "When we started this, it was just about helping Thunder Ridge. Now it feels like we're caught in something a lot bigger." Murphy chuckled. "That's because we are. When you stand up to people who thrive on fear, you become a target. But you also become a symbol. And symbols, they're powerful." Henry nodded. "So, we keep going. We don't back down." Murphy's expression grew serious. We don't just keep going. We adapt. We outsmart them. They think they know who we are, what we're capable of. But they have no idea. As the first signs of winter touched Thunder Ridge, the Brotherhood stood united, ready to face whatever came next. The threats they faced were unlike anything they had encountered before. But their resolve was unshakable. They were more than a group of veterans, they were a movement. A force for change in a world that desperately needed it. And as the winds shifted, carrying whispers of the challenges ahead, Henry, Murphy, Scorpion, and Lightning knew one thing for certain: they would stand together. No matter the cost. The tension in Thunder Ridge was palpable as whispers of impending conflict spread throughout the town. The criminal organizations and corporate security firms that viewed the Veterans Brotherhood as a threat had begun to escalate their tactics. Subtle acts of intimidation, suspicious vehicles lingering near homes, veiled threats to business owners, and cryptic messages left on doorsteps were meant to sow fear and division. But the veterans and the townspeople were resolute. They had faced worse before. And now, they were ready to face it together. Henry Jacobs stood before a packed meeting room in the town hall. The room buzzed with nervous energy as townspeople, veterans, and local leaders gathered to discuss their next steps. Colonel Jack Murphy was at Henry's side, his calm demeanor a reassuring presence. "We've seen this before," Murphy began, his voice steady but firm. "People who use fear to control others always assume that they're stronger. They think intimidation is enough to break a community. But they're wrong. What makes us strong isn't fear, it's unity." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. But the weight of the situation was still heavy. Murphy stepped aside, gesturing for Lightning to address the crowd. Lightning, once a symbol of the very chaos they were now fighting against, stood tall. His transformation had been a beacon of hope for many in Thunder Ridge. As he took the floor, the room fell silent. "I know some of you might still see me as the guy I used to be," Lightning began, his voice filled with conviction. "And I don't blame you. I was part of the problem. I let anger and fear drive me. But thanks to Henry, Murphy, and all of you, I've learned that strength doesn't come from tearing people down. It comes from building something worth protecting." He paused, scanning the faces in the crowd. "Right now, there are people out there who want to break what we've built. They want us to turn on each other, to doubt ourselves. But we can't let that happen. This town, this brotherhood, is proof that when we stand together, we can overcome anything." The town council, seated at the front of the room, exchanged glances. Their leader, Mayor Ellen Porter, leaned forward, addressing Lightning directly. "What do you propose we do?" she asked, her tone cautious but open. "How do we protect ourselves without escalating the situation?" Lightning nodded, grateful for the question. "We start by strengthening our connections. This isn't just about defense, it's about making sure everyone knows they have someone to turn to. That's what the Brotherhood is here for. We're not just veterans, we're your neighbors, your friends, your family. If we stay united, they can't divide us." Murphy stepped in, his authoritative voice commanding attention. "We've already begun coordinating with nearby towns, sharing information, and establishing lines of communication. What we need now is your commitment. This has to be a community effort. Everyone has a role to play. Whether it's watching for suspicious activity, supporting local businesses, or just looking out for your neighbors." The room erupted in applause, the tide of fear beginning to turn into determination. Over the next few weeks, the Veterans Brotherhood doubled down on their efforts to strengthen their ties to the community. They hosted workshops on emergency preparedness, self-defense classes, and town-wide meetings to ensure everyone was informed and involved. The community center became a hub of activity, bustling with volunteers and leaders working together. Scorpion took charge of coordinating patrols, organizing teams of veterans and townspeople to keep an eye on vulnerable areas. His tactical expertise, honed during his time in the gang and now repurposed for good, proved invaluable. "We're not just keeping watch," Scorpion explained during a briefing. "We're showing them that we're not afraid. Every time they see us out there, working together, it's a reminder that we're stronger than they are." Meanwhile, Lightning took a more personal approach. He spent his days visiting businesses, checking in with families, and sharing his story at schools and community events. His presence, once a source of fear, had become a symbol of hope and redemption. One evening, the Brotherhood organized a town-wide gathering at the community center. The event was part celebration, part strategy session, and part morale boost. Lila Harper, the owner of the diner, had provided food, while local musicians played uplifting tunes. As the crowd settled in, Mayor Porter took the stage. "Tonight isn't just about what we've accomplished," she said. "It's about what we're going to do next. Together." She gestured to Lightning, who stood at the edge of the stage. "And to start us off, I'd like to invite someone who has shown us all what it means to grow, to lead, and to inspire." The applause was deafening as Lightning stepped onto the stage. He held up his hands, a humble smile on his face. "I never thought I'd be here," he began, his voice carrying over the crowd. "Not just on this stage, but in this place. When I was part of the problem, I thought strength came from fear and control. But I've learned that real strength comes from love, from trust, and from standing together." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. "They're going to keep testing us. They'll try to break us. But they don't understand what we have. We're not just a town. We're a family. And as long as we stick together, there's nothing they can do to stop us." The crowd erupted in cheers, the energy in the room electric. For the first time in weeks, the people of Thunder Ridge felt not just prepared but empowered. The weeks that followed saw a remarkable transformation. The Brotherhood's efforts had galvanized the town, turning fear into resolve. The threats from outside forces didn't disappear, but they no longer held the same power. Every attempt at intimidation was met with unwavering unity, and every challenge became an opportunity to grow stronger. Henry, Murphy, Scorpion, and Lightning watched it all unfold with pride. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they also knew they wouldn't face it alone. Together, they had built something unbreakable, a community rooted in trust, resilience, and the unshakable belief that strength truly lay in unity. The sun was setting over Thunder Ridge, casting long shadows over the town streets as Scorpion parked his motorcycle outside the diner. The quiet hum of activity inside was a stark contrast to the storm brewing in his chest. He had received the letter 2 weeks ago. A simple envelope with no return address. The contents written in a handwriting he hadn't seen in years. "Son, if you're reading this, it means I've finally worked up the courage to reach out. I know it's been a long time, and I don't expect forgiveness for the years I wasn't there. But I'd like to see you. I'll be in Thunder Ridge next month, staying at the Sunrise Motel. If you're willing to talk, I'll be there. Dad." Scorpion had read the letter a dozen times since it arrived, each word stirring a mixture of anger, hope, and uncertainty. His father, who had walked out when he was just a boy, had resurfaced after all these years. Scorpion wasn't sure how to feel about it, but he knew he couldn't ignore it. The Sunrise Motel was as unremarkable as Scorpion remembered. Its faded sign flickered weakly, and the parking lot was sparsely populated with a few old cars. Scorpion parked his bike and took a deep breath before heading toward room 12. He hesitated outside the door, his hand hovering just above the surface before he finally knocked. The door opened almost immediately, revealing a man in his late 60s. His once broad shoulders were stooped, and his face was lined with age. But there was no mistaking the resemblance. Scorpion saw his own sharp features reflected in his father's face, softened by time and regret. "Eli," the man said, his voice trembling slightly. "You came." Scorpion's jaw tightened. He hadn't gone by his birth name in years, but hearing it now stirred something deep within him. "I'm here," he said simply. "What do you want?" His father stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. "I just want to talk. Please." The room was small and sparsely furnished, a single bed taking up most of the space. Scorpion sat in a worn chair by the window, arms crossed as he watched his father pour 2 cups of coffee from a motel-sized machine. The silence between them was heavy, but neither seemed willing to break it. Finally, his father spoke. "I know I'm the last person you wanted to hear from, and I wouldn't blame you if you walked out that door right now. But I've been carrying this for years, and I needed to say it." Scorpion's eyes narrowed. "Say what?" The older man sighed, setting a cup of coffee on the table in front of Scorpion. "That I'm sorry. For leaving. For not being there when you needed me. I was a coward. Eli. I thought I was doing what was best for you and your mom. But looking back, I see it was just easier for me to run." Scorpion's chest tightened at the mention of his mother. She had done everything to raise him on her own, sacrificing so much to give him a chance at a better life. The anger he'd buried for years began to surface. "You think an apology changes anything?" he said, his voice sharp. "You weren't there. And we had to pick up the pieces. You don't get to walk back in and pretend it's all okay." His father flinched but didn't look away. "You're right. I don't deserve forgiveness. But I'm here now because I want to try. I've seen what you've been doing, how you've turned your life around, and I want to be part of it. If you'll let me." Scorpion leaned back in his chair, studying the man before him. He saw the sincerity in his father's eyes, the weight of years of regret etched into his face. For the first time, he felt a flicker of something other than anger, an inkling of understanding. The conversation stretched late into the evening, the initial tension gradually giving way to tentative connection. His father shared stories of his own struggles, his regrets, and his attempts to make amends in other areas of his life. Scorpion listened, his defenses slowly lowering as he realized they shared more in common than he had ever imagined. "I'm not asking you to forget what I did," his father said as the clock struck midnight. "But I'd like a chance to prove that I'm not the same man who left all those years ago. I'd like to get to know the man you've become." Scorpion's jaw tightened, but he nodded slowly. "I can't promise anything. But if you're serious about this, we'll see where it goes." His father's face broke into a relieved smile. "That's all I can ask for." Over the following weeks, Scorpion and his father began to rebuild their relationship, piece by fragile piece. They met regularly, sharing meals and working together on small projects around town. For Scorpion, the process was far from easy, but each step felt like progress, not just for their relationship, but for his own sense of closure. One afternoon, as they worked side by side repairing a fence on the outskirts of town, his father paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "You know," he said, leaning on the fence post, "I'm proud of you, Eli. Not just for what you've done here, but for the man you've become. Your mom would be. 2. Scorpion swallowed hard, his throat tightening. He nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Thanks, he said finally. That means a lot. 4. Scorpion. The reconciliation with his father became a symbol of the personal impact of the Veterans Brotherhood's mission. It wasn't just about fighting external battles, it was about healing the internal ones as well. And as he continued to grow, he knew that his story was just one of many, a testament to the power of redemption, forgiveness, and the strength to move forward. The morning in Thunder Ridge began like any other, calm and unassuming. But beneath the surface, tension buzzed like a tightly wound wire. For weeks, whispers of a looming threat had reached the Veterans Brotherhood. Reconnaissance and informants confirmed the worst. The cartel had grown tired of the Brotherhood's interference and was preparing to launch an all-out assault. This time, they weren't sending a ragtag crew, they had hired professional mercenaries, trained and well-equipped. Henry Jacobs stood in the newly fortified community center, now serving as a command post. A large map of the town covered one wall, with pins marking strategic points and potential vulnerabilities. Around him, veterans and local law enforcement officers huddled in groups, reviewing plans and coordinating efforts. Colonel Jack Murphy addressed the room, his voice calm but authoritative. We have confirmation that the cartel's forces are mobilizing. They'll hit us hard, likely targeting key areas, the community center, Main Street, and the outskirts where we've been training volunteers. Lightning, standing near the back, crossed his arms. They're going to expect us to panic, to scatter. But they've underestimated us. Murphy nodded. Exactly. That's why our focus is on coordination. We'll be ready for them. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the first signs of the cartel's approach appeared. A convoy of black SUVs and trucks rolled into the outskirts of town, their movements precise and deliberate. The mercenaries emerged, clad in tactical gear and armed with state-of-the-art weaponry. Henry watched through binoculars from his position on the roof of the hardware store. They're here, he said into his radio. Teams, get into position. The veterans moved swiftly, taking up defensive positions at predetermined choke points. Sandbags, barricades, and strategically placed obstacles turned the town into a fortress. Local law enforcement officers, led by Sheriff Cole Harris, worked alongside the veterans, their combined force a testament to the strength of unity. The first clash occurred on the northern edge of town. A team of mercenaries attempted to breach the perimeter, but they were met with a coordinated response. Scorpion and his team, positioned behind cover, waited until the attackers were fully exposed before opening fire. The veterans' precision and discipline outmatched the mercenaries' brute force. Hold your fire until they commit, Scorpion had instructed earlier, his voice steady. They'll think we're caught off guard. Let's prove them wrong. The mercenaries, realizing their mistake, retreated to regroup. Scorpion's team maintained their position, ensuring no gaps in the defense. Meanwhile, Lightning and a small group of veterans held the line at the community center. The mercenaries' approach was more calculated here, using drones to scout for weaknesses. Lightning anticipated this, having set up decoy positions to mislead their surveillance. They're biting, Lightning said, watching the drone feed from a hacked monitor. They think the weak spots are here and here, he added, pointing to the map. Let them come. When the mercenaries advanced, they walked straight into a trap. Explosives rigged along the decoy positions detonated, disorienting the attackers and forcing them into the veterans' crossfire. The mercenaries' disciplined formation quickly unraveled as confusion set in. Lightning grinned, his voice steady over the radio. Another wave neutralized. Community center is secure. On Main Street, Murphy led a mobile unit, coordinating with Sheriff Harris to manage the flow of the battle. The cartel had deployed vehicles outfitted with mounted weapons, attempting to intimidate the defenders. But the veterans anticipated this move. Target the tires and engines, Murphy instructed over the radio. Immobilize them first, then deal with the gunners. The veterans' precision marksmanship quickly disabled the vehicles, forcing the mercenaries to abandon them and fight on foot. The tactical advantage shifted as Murphy's unit pushed the attackers back, reclaiming ground with calculated efficiency. Sheriff Harris, crouched behind a barricade, looked at Murphy with admiration. "I've seen some tough fights in my time, but nothing like this. You've got one hell of a team." Murphy gave a grim smile. "They're not just a team. They're family." As the battle raged on, the cartel's forces began to falter. Their initial confidence had been eroded by the veterans' strategic defense and the unwavering resolve of the townspeople. Communication breakdowns among the mercenaries further weakened their efforts, while the Brotherhood's cohesion only grew stronger. In the final hours of the assault, the cartel's remaining forces made a desperate push toward the center of town. Henry, stationed near the heart of Thunder Ridge, coordinated reinforcements to intercept them. "This is their last play," Henry said into his radio. "Let's make sure it fails." The veterans and law enforcement converged on the attackers, cutting off their escape routes and forcing them into a surrender. The battle ended not with a bang, but with the quiet clinking of weapons being dropped to the ground. When the dust settled, Thunder Ridge stood victorious. The cartel's operation had been dismantled, and their mercenaries were in custody. The town, though battered, had proven its resilience once again. Henry and Murphy surveyed the aftermath, their expressions a mix of exhaustion and pride. "We did it," Henry said, his voice heavy with emotion. Murphy nodded. "Because we stood together. That's what makes the difference." Around them, the townspeople emerged from their homes, their faces reflecting a mixture of relief and gratitude. The veterans and law enforcement officers were greeted with cheers and heartfelt thanks, their efforts a testament to the power of unity. In the weeks that followed, the Brotherhood and the townspeople worked tirelessly to repair the damage and ensure the cartel's influence was eradicated. Thunder Ridge had faced its greatest threat yet and emerged stronger, a beacon of hope for other communities facing similar battles. For Henry, Murphy, Scorpion, Lightning, and the rest of the Brotherhood, the victory was more than just a triumph over their enemies. It was a reminder of what they could achieve when they stood together, united by a common purpose and an unshakable resolve. The morning air in Thunder Ridge carried the crisp promise of a new beginning. The town, once plagued by fear and chaos, now stood as a symbol of hope and transformation. Bright banners hung across Main Street, celebrating the collective efforts of the Veterans Brotherhood and the townspeople who had rebuilt their community from the ground up. The scars of the past, damaged storefronts, shattered windows, and lingering doubt had been replaced with a renewed sense of purpose. Henry Jacobs walked through the bustling town square, tipping his hat to passers-by who greeted him warmly. Beside him, Colonel Jack Murphy carried a folder filled with letters and emails from across the country. Each message told a similar story, communities facing their own battles. Inspired by the success of Thunder Ridge and eager to replicate its model of unity and resilience. "It's spreading faster than I expected," Murphy said, flipping through the folder. "We've got requests from towns in every state, asking for advice, training, or even just a visit to see how we did it." Henry nodded thoughtfully. "That's good. It means people are paying attention. They see that there's another way." Murphy paused, his gaze scanning the square. But it also means we've got more responsibility. We can't just be a success story. We have to be a blueprint. Inside the community center, the Veterans Brotherhood had established a dedicated team to handle the influx of inquiries. Maps of the United States lined the walls, marked with pins representing towns and cities that had reached out for help. Scorpion and Lightning, now leaders within the organization, coordinated efforts to train new chapters and share the lessons learned in Thunder Ridge. This one's from a town in Oregon, Lightning said, holding up a letter. They've been dealing with a gang that's been terrorizing their farmers. They want us to send a team to help them organize a defense. Scorpion nodded, adding the letter to a growing pile. And this one's from a community in Texas. They're asking for advice on starting a local chapter. They've already got a group of veterans ready to lead it. Henry entered the room, his presence commanding immediate attention. How's it looking, boys? Busy, Lightning said with a grin. But that's a good problem to have. Henry smiled. Damn right it is. The fact that people are reaching out means we're making a difference. But we've got to make sure we do this right. It's not just about fighting back, it's about building something that lasts. In the months that followed, Thunder Ridge became a hub for training and education. Veterans from across the country traveled to the small town to learn the principles that had transformed it: unity, preparation, and a commitment to protecting the vulnerable. Workshops covered everything from tactical defense strategies to community organizing, ensuring that every participant left with the tools to replicate the success in their own towns. One of the most impactful programs was the Mentorship Initiative, where seasoned veterans like Henry and Murphy worked directly with younger leaders. These sessions weren't just about teaching skills, they were about instilling the values that had made the Brotherhood successful. It's not about being the strongest or the loudest, Henry explained during one session. It's about being the one people can count on. When they see you, they need to feel safe. That's what leadership is. The younger veterans listened intently, their respect for Henry evident in their focused expressions. One of them, a woman named Clara who had served in Afghanistan, spoke up. How do you keep going when it feels like the odds are stacked against you? Henry's gaze softened. You remember why you're doing it. It's not about the odds. It's about the people you're standing up for. And when you see the difference you're making, that's what keeps you going. As the movement grew, media attention followed. News outlets highlighted the success of Thunder Ridge and the Brotherhood, portraying it as a model of grassroots empowerment. Henry and Murphy were invited to speak at national conferences, sharing their story with audiences ranging from community leaders to policymakers. During one such event in Washington, D.C., Murphy addressed a packed auditorium. What we've done in Thunder Ridge isn't magic, he said. It's about people coming together, recognizing their own strength, and refusing to be intimidated. That's something any community can do, with the right support and the right mindset. The audience erupted in applause, inspired by the simplicity and power of his message. Underscore 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 underscore. Back in Thunder Ridge, the town continued to thrive. The streets were filled with laughter and life, a testament to the resilience of its people. The Veterans Brotherhood had become an integral part of the community. Its members not just protectors but neighbors, friends, and mentors. One evening, as the sun set over the town, Henry, Murphy, Scorpion, and Lightning stood together on the porch of the community center. They watched as a group of children played in the square, their laughter echoing in the warm evening air. "We've come a long way," Murphy said, his voice filled with pride. Henry nodded. "And we've got a long way to go. But if Thunder Ridge is any indication, I'd say we're on the right track." Scorpion grinned. "One town at a time. Right?" "That's right," Henry replied, his gaze steady. One town at a time. As the stars began to fill the sky, the four men stood in silence, each of them reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. They knew the road ahead would be challenging, but they also knew they wouldn't walk it alone. The movement they had built was bigger than any one person. It was a testament to the power of unity, resilience, and the unyielding belief that change was always possible. The morning light streamed over Thunder Ridge, illuminating the town square in a soft, golden glow. The American flag fluttered proudly at full mast outside the community center, a symbol of resilience, unity, and the sacrifices that had brought the town to this moment. Henry Jacobs stood at the base of the flagpole, his hands in his pockets, gazing upward. To him, the flag was more than fabric, it was a testament to what they had built together. Behind him, the hum of life in the square was a soothing melody. Children chased each other around the fountain. Shopkeepers greeted their regulars, and the laughter of neighbors filled the air. The scars of the past, the fear, the violence, the uncertainty, were now only memories, replaced by a thriving community bound by trust and purpose. Colonel Jack Murphy joined Henry, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you could use this," Murphy said, handing one over. Henry accepted it with a nod. "Thanks. Just thinking about how far we've come." Murphy followed his gaze to the flag. "It's been a hell of a journey," he said, "but worth every step." Henry chuckled softly. "Funny how something like this starts small. Just a few people standing up for what they believe in. And now look at it." Murphy smiled. "It's not just a town anymore. It's a symbol. People across the country are looking to Thunder Ridge as proof that change is possible." Inside the community center, the day's work was already underway. Scorpion and Lightning were briefing a group of visiting veterans who had come to learn from Thunder Ridge's success. Maps, plans, and photos lined the walls, chronicling the journey from a town under siege to a beacon of hope. "It wasn't easy," Scorpion said, addressing the group, "but it was worth it. The key is trust. Trust in your people. Trust in the process. And most importantly, trust in yourself to do what needs to be done." Lightning chimed in. "And remember, it's not just about fighting back. It's about building something better. That's what makes it last." The visiting veterans nodded, their expressions a mix of determination and inspiration. They had come seeking answers, and they were leaving with a roadmap to transform their own communities. That afternoon, the town held a gathering in the square. It was a moment to celebrate their journey, to honor those who had made it possible, and to look ahead to the future. Mayor Ellen Porter took the stage, her voice carrying across the crowd. "Today, we stand as proof that no challenge is insurmountable," she said. "Thunder Ridge has faced its share of trials, but we faced them together. And because of that, we've come out stronger." She gestured to Henry, Murphy, Scorpion, and Lightning, who stood at the front of the crowd. These men were the spark that lit the fire of change. They reminded us of what we're capable of when we stand united. Let's honor them, not just with our applause, but by continuing the work they've started. The crowd erupted into cheers, the sound echoing off the buildings that framed the square. It was a moment of unity, of shared purpose, and of gratitude. As the gathering concluded, Henry found himself standing alone at the edge of the square, watching as the townspeople dispersed. Murphy joined him, his expression thoughtful. "You're quiet," Murphy said. Henry shrugged. "Just thinking about what comes next. We've done a lot, but there's still so much to do." Murphy nodded. "There always is. But that's the nature of this kind of work. It's never really done. You just pass the torch to the next group and hope they carry it forward." Henry smiled faintly. "You think they will?" Murphy glanced back at the community center, where the visiting veterans were still deep in conversation. "I don't think. I know. They've got the fire. They'll keep it burning." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Henry returned to the flagpole. He watched as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. The flag fluttered gently in the breeze, its presence a constant reminder of the journey they had taken and the legacy they had built. Lightning approached, his footsteps quiet on the gravel. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. Henry gestured for him to come closer. "Not at all." They stood in silence for a moment before Lightning spoke. "I never thought I'd find a place like this. A purpose like this. Feels good. You know? Knowing we've made a difference." Henry glanced at him, a proud smile on his face. "You have. Lightning. More than you realize. And it's just the beginning." Lightning nodded, his gaze fixed on the flag. "Here's to what comes next." Henry raised his coffee cup in a silent toast. "Here's to what comes next." As the stars began to fill the sky, Thunder Ridge stood as a beacon of hope, its legacy carried forward by those who believed in the enduring power of brotherhood, resilience, and unity. Thunder Ridge stands tall as a beacon of hope and transformation. What does this story inspire in you? Share your thoughts in the comments. And let's explore how communities everywhere can build strength through unity. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.